Welcome, welcome, young beardlings. Gather around, for I have a tale to tell. The Hellsmiths of Hashut have arrived, and it has created a ripple amongst our Chaos Dwarfs fans. And why, I ask? Well, for that we will go back to the past, as we will have a look at the last battle tome, back then called Army Book, ever released for the Chaos Dwarfs. The White Dwarf supplement. Warhammer Armies, Chaos Dwarfs, which was released in 1994 by the venerable Rick Priestley, sculpted by the Perrys, so all the old big names that you will never have heard because they all moved on to own companies or other companies. So let's have a look at this venerable tome, which has been released 31 years ago. And it starts with some nice artwork before we go into the lore of the Chaos Dwarfs. Now, one thing that you can say about the Warhammer world, every bad guy at least had some nuances, or they were fighting each other and everything. And the Chaos Dwarfs were the most unified of them all. The Sorcerer Prophets didn't do backstabbing. They all had just the idea that they wanted to subjugate the whole world. Their own kindred of the regular dwarfs, but also all the rest, all had to be enslaved for the forges of Hashut. They were also the ones that actually created the Black Orcs, like the Uruk-hai were made by Saruman, in the movies at least. We have a history of the Chaos Dwarfs here, and then we get the rules. The Chaos Dwarf Blunderbuss. This was awesome. It laid down a fire zone 12 inches forward, as wide as a unit, and as bigger as your unit was. They could fire in ranks. You just hit everything under that in a complete storm of shrapnel. Half the units and everything, because your hits didn't extend. You just blasted everything away. More great rules for the Chaos Dwarf Earthshaker, because it has this normal strength 7 D-try wound, -4 modifier. But it also had this great Earthshake rule that if you hit with the big template, you drew 2d6 and everything in that range of the enemy, not yours, because you're a Chaos Dwarf, you are stubborn, you are used to it, would not be able to fire and would have half movement. So that was a real army opponent negating effect. Then we also, of course, had our famous Death Shrieker rockets, who are a bit smaller than they are now, but that was just your regular gunpowdered power bolt rock lobber. And, of course, our venerable allies slash workforce slash, well, let's keep the slave population intact. Hobgoblins brought a bolt thrower because we had to give them something to keep them happy. The Chaos Dwarf magic, the cards were included here, so you could just copy them. Remember, this is a book from way before digital downloads. Hell, Warhammer community or even a Warhammer online web store wasn't even invented. You wanted to mail order something, you had to fill in a paper form, send it up with a signed check, and then if you were lucky, within 4 to 6 weeks, your models were already with you. It was that long ago. It was a dark age, but a good age. You had the Doom Roars, the Shadows of Hashut. Every army there back then had a spell deck of 10, and some were totally over the top. And here you see our lovely army in full color against the misguided dwarfs. Before we get a battle report, it was the first one they were featured in. Well, there were Chaos Dwarfs before, but the big hats, that was their look, and it has remained, and that's why we were all so wild about the new Hellsmiths. Because, by the way, there was a story how that happened. Brian Ansell was on a convention in America, and he had to call back to the studio where they were developing them, and he just wanted to have big hats. And he called 3 or 4 or 5 times, and if they said, "Are their hats big enough? Are their hats big enough?" And the Perrys on the project, they just kept sculpting up the hats, bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, I don't know if they found it funny or they just wanted to be free of the whole telephoning all day. It was a pre-internet day, so they couldn't show any pictures. And that's how we ended up with our lovely Babylonian style cones on our heads. By the way, if you think that's an urban legend, it was actually confirmed a while ago in an interview with Film Deck. Go check out his channel with Rick Priestley. But the Battle of NRL Doomsawa, the Chaos Dwarfs deployed against the High Elves, who had a force on the table and an entry point. And the High Elves, they were the regular ones, with Elf Lord on a Griffin, Imbralian, another hero, their chariots, their warriors, their sword masters, the regular, while we had our glorious flyers, war machines, blunderbusses and hobgoblin allies. So a traditional 3000 points army back in those days. And of course, you can follow, this is the old style with the maps, how the units moved. I love battle reports like that. I loved it way more than how they're depicted now in the White Dwarfs and everything. So you had the story, maps with icons telling where the units were moving, what was happening, and some color pictures searched in between. And it was the glorious might of the Chaos Dwarfs who carried the day, taking down the flyers. They just couldn't stop it. The power of the Chaos Dwarfs was too mighty, even though this was a close one. There's also a battle report in the White Dwarf somewhere, back in those days, where they fought Mike McVeigh's excellent converted Wood Elves, which was back then a niche army that also barely had anything. And they just trashed them. And then we go to the heavy metal. It is the red period of Games Workshop, for those who know, who are that old, and our looks of red and blue armor. So I stepped up from this. Remember this icon? Hashut guards. Yeah. The Great Taurus, the Sorcerer riding the Lamassu, our Axemen, the Bull Centaurs, our lovely war machines. I still think this particular thing is the one thing that I love about the Chaos Dwarfs. This was, well, my first model were Bull Centaur and some Metal Axemen, but this was the thing that made me fall totally in love with them. Because you have to remember, I was on pocket money back then. 31 years ago I was 16, so I did my first holiday jobs and everything. And we actually went out to buy some expansion for Hero Quest with the game group, and we got totally wrong. We never had heard of Warhammer. It was in a store in Antwerp, The Lonely Mountain. And well, I bought this book because we thought it was rules, and a blister of Metal Axemen, and a Bull Centaur standard bearer, and that was the start of my journey. And I saw this, and we realized we bought something for another game. So instead of putting it aside, the day after we went back to the city and we bought a Warhammer box with our group, and all the rest is history. But the bearers of the shell for the Earthshaker, that was what made me go crazy about this army. And it was even back then expensive compared to now, even though it was a tenth of the price. But this was 1,099 Belgian francs back then, the Earthshaker cannon. So divided by 40 was about, 25 euros. But yeah, inflation and everything, so we're not gonna go too melancholy on the prices. And then of course we have the Hobgoblin units, also in our lavishly red, because the red period, the Wolf Riders. And then we go to the Black Orc and the Orc Warriors, were our slave units. You could put goblins and orcs in your army. And then we go to the bestiary with all the rules. So we got the regular Chaos Dwarfs, the Sorcerers, the Bull Centaurs, Great Taurus, Lamassu, Hobgoblins, Sneaky Gits. They were really great with their poison daggers and unlimited lapping. So even if you lost, they could just lap around. You would have heaps of attacks with the additional hand weapons and everything. So then get the Black Orcs, the Orcs and the regular Goblins. Now, back then, Greenskins had animosity, so they could just start fighting amongst themselves out of the blue. And Orcs and Goblins, they would negate it if there were Black Orcs amongst them who weren't suffering animosity. But those three, they all would ignore their animosity if there were Hobgoblins on the table, because they mistrusted them even more than each other. But that was quite fun. And then we have the army list. So back then it was all divided. You have a percentage of characters, a percentage of war machines that you could take. So characters 50%, units 25 plus, so that's your core units, war machines 25%, monsters maximum 25%, and allies, which could come from the Orcs and Goblin and Chaos lists. So your Bull Centaurs, your Sneaky Gits, your blunderbusses, they all went just into the units, and you needed to have at least, let's say for a 2000 point game, 500 points of them around. Your characters could be maximum 1000 points, which was a great value, because you could then take both the Towers and the Lamassu. and the war machines was a bit the same. So and then you got all the army list, traditional style with the points. So you got a hero, your basic cost, no fancy all rounded out points. You got like 104 points for a Chaos Dwarf hero, 232 for a Bull Centaur hero, 59, and then you got +1 for that, +4 for this, +3 for that. So you ended up with units, well, not always nicely ending up like in Age of Sigmar with at the 0 or a 5 at the end. So good luck, start puzzling, toss in some magic items and everything, and then you go. You always had to take a unit of Chaos Dwarfs, so no cheating there. And then, well, you could just fill it all up. For example, to give an idea about the points, a goblin was 2.5 points, and cheap units like those, they only paid half price as well for the upgrade. So it was a shield at a half point. And then you could give him a shield or a short bow and you would end up with 3.5 points, and you could just stack it all up. So you could have blunderbusses with their heavy armor. There was no black shard army back then. But a heavy armor, a shield and a great axe and all that on one figure. So yeah, that was pretty fun. And yeah, well, we all were very good in calculus back in those days to build an army list. Because, again, the age of the internet, you just had to do it with a pen and paper, no digital army builders. And then you had some special characters, Zatan the Black, which was a commander of the Chaos Dwarfs, and Gordos Backstabber, a hobgoblin chieftain, and Astragoth, the high priest of Hashut. He was around from the beginning. And then we got the, well, these were the catalog pages, so you could find these, and then you could get a paper, and then you could mail order even separate parts if you wanted. If you just need a Lamassus hit, you had to fill in on the paper, Lamassus hit and the number, the code number, and you could buy it like that. So it was pretty cool. The range had the Great Taurus, the characters. This hero, particularly with the axe, I still think is one of the coolest around. Just as that over-the-top glorified look. The warriors, all metal of course, everything. The bull centaurs, the war machines, and then we come to the hobgoblins and their bolt thrower and wolf riders. So the only thing back in those days that was plastic were the wolves, the wheels of the war machines. Then there was a monopose 10 Chaos Dwarf warrior little box, and I think that's it. Yep, that was everything that was in plastic. All the rest was metal, well, bar the slaughter bases. And finally, your most important page in the book, which I'm still using this day, as you could see recently with the hobgoblins I am painting up. You could see them in my weekly painting of this. The banner page, so all the flags, all the banners back then in the army, you can still use them perfectly. Scan it in, print it out, just download it somewhere digital, it's everywhere. And then you could just paint them up or use them as is. And then we got at the end some of the other armies that were around back then. So the undead, you didn't have vampire counts and tomb kings, no, you just had undead. So imagine an army where you can have Nagash, the Cetra and Manfred von Karstein together. Yeah, that was pretty nasty. He was also the hero hammer, so characters were better, big ones. And here we end up with a final look. Again, against some high elves with a Pegasus, a high elf hero and a Pegasus. Yes, it was a thing back then. Some medium cavalry, so not the light reavers or the heavy dragonites. But yeah, that's it. Our glorious Chaos Dwarf book. The army book, Warhammer Army Chaos Dwarfs, anno 1994. And here it all started for me. Thanks for watching to this little flick through, and I hope it has tingled your interest in, well, old Hammer as well. Though be warned, you might better look for third parties or recasts or resin casters or whatever that rocks your boat. Even convert a new army of models, because this, if you want the original metals, you're gonna pay an arm and a leg, some kidneys, and probably your soul to buy them. Thanks for watching. Bye bye. Did you like the Chaos Dwarf content in this video and want to know more about Chaos Dwarfs? Then check out the Chaos Dwarf online forum by scanning the QR code you now see on screen.